Welcome. I'm excited to share with you this recording from my 2017 Going Beyond Revenue Summit. This interview is with my past coach and mentor, Tina Forsyth. I chose Tina because she made not only a big impact on my business by teaching me how to leverage my time and grow my team and really step into my leadership of what I was providing. She also introduced me to the book Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. And of course, that was the catalyst to not only saving my business at the time, it also introduced me to a new way of providing services, a new way of conversation with clients, and is the crucial key of what I will be doing now in the future. I also resonated a lot with Tina's story. It's after 5 years of growth, she turned around and had nothing really to show for it. She had created 6 figures and then chose to spend 6 figures on coaching. That took her 3 to 4 years to pay off. But what I really loved was that she figured out the sweet spot between urgency and stupidity and learned how to be purposeful with debt, not being carried away by emotions that sometimes was what we used to create the debt. So ultimately, she found the freedom of what money could be and how it supports her family. And again, it just resonated strongly with her story, which is why I chose her for the summit. So I hope this story from her and her guidance will impact your world. So please enjoy this recording with Tina Forsyth. Thank you.
Rock bottom moment, at least in my business, there was where I was at the bottom of this pit, for lack of a better word, looking up, wondering how the hell did I get there? And it happens usually at that evolution stage. And I'm wondering, did you have one of those in your business? And more importantly, what happened after? How did it shift you? What did you do with it? So what was your rock bottom moment?
Yeah, I think, I don't even know if it was it wasn't a cursed kind of rock bottom moment, like some people have a story of basically things fell apart in some grandiose fashion. For me, it was a little different. I've had my business since 1999, and the first 10 years were very much a solopreneur type of business. But in 2009, I shifted my business model, and I shifted from one-on-one service provider, mainly working as an online business manager at that time, to doing training and coaching and various things that you meant, some of which you mentioned already. And I had been doing that for a number of years, and it was about 2014 where I hit this space that I would best describe as kind of being it was okay. I'd hit 6 figures. I was making, I hit 6 figures years before that, but I was making good money. I was lots of freedom, good team, etc., all kinds of good things going on. And yet it wasn't feeling necessarily that great. Despite the fact that I was making good money, for example, it was always going out the door again. It was what was happening. And so it would be woohoo! This thing happened, this sale happened, this program did well, etc., and then be oh, wait a minute, that doesn't make any big difference. Or to think that to continually chase that space of once I get there, then everything will change. And when I was it was the summer of 2014 when I had read Profit First that you mentioned, right? And I think when I read that book, it was a bit of an epiphany that I had been sort of in this downward slide of sorts, the blah slide instead of the rock bottom moment. It was more like the blah moment. And really realizing that I had been working my butt off for years. At 15 years at that point in my business. And even though I was paying myself, and even though I was, all things were pretty good, I wasn't in any major trouble or anything. What I didn't have was anything left over to show for it. I didn't have anything that was left over to show for it. So I would make money, it would go back out the door again. And when I read Profit First, that was kind of this epiphany moment that was oh, putting aside money first, having a profit account, making that the priority, just setting aside a percentage of income with every dollar that comes in the door. And for me, it was, it's the simplicity of the model that I like. But for me too, it was this real shift of just being able to say like, yeah, I'm going to work my butt off, but I want to have something to show for it. I want to have something in the long run that's going to feel worthwhile with everything that I've been pouring into this. And that really did change for me. I mean, very quickly within, oh gosh, I want to say within about a year and a half, I paid off a huge amount of debt that I had in the business, just strictly with, not because I was making a bunch more money or anything like that. It was just through following that model and the simplicity of it, and was really feeling in control of my money, if that makes sense. Like even like you mentioned, I was almost an accountant. I still do my own bookkeeping. You can slap my wrist for that if you'd like. I'm definitely a bit of a control freak around the money side of things, keeping on top of things, but had never really felt like I was in control of my money, if that makes sense, up until about that point in my business.
That's interesting I think that's a key sentence right there, that you didn't feel in control of the money. Yeah. And the system really does bring that back into play. And it's very simple.
And then it's so easy. I just think there's such a misconception out there that more money is going to solve everything.
Right.
And it's just not true. It's just not true. Like to always, and that's part of what we're sold to. We're sold. I mean, if you had asked me years ago what would happen if I hit six figures in my business, which I did in 2009, if you had asked me before then, I would have thought the skies were going to part and the angels were going to sing, and that I would never worry about money again. And then I hit that in my business, and that was good. But then all of a sudden I had to start spending money, and I had shifted my business model. And like I was saying, money coming in would go back out again. And it didn't matter what milestone I kept hitting. I would grow year after year after year. It didn't make any difference. It didn't mean I had more money in the bank.
No.
At all. And so that constant chase for like more, it actually doesn't make a difference for most people I know. Even people who even somebody I could look at today and be like, wow, they're making so much money. That doesn't mean on the back end they're keeping any of it.
No,
it's a really fascinating kind of, it's not a secret, or the unspoken side, I guess you could say, of what goes on for so many people.
Yeah, I think, there's two parts there. One is we don't necessarily talk about money in a public situation because how we were raised, that it's dirty or not polite to talk about money. So we talk about it in coaching, but my first coaches was just about top line revenue. And I think at the different stages of your business, that is the focus. How can you get people, what are you selling? Really define what that is, what it's going to look like. I originally put my packages together based on my employee mindset. So there was no profit put in it. So my first coach helped me put profit into my pricing. But the other part was that I read in the book Profit First that really opened my mind was that a business to be sustainable for one employee needs to make around $150,000, I think.
Yeah.
And when you're making low six figures, basically you need to be at $150,000 just to feed yourself and the business. And a lot of people have teams by then. I did. And so that's why there was so much hustle. The business just was not at a level it could sustain the costs that I had created based on what I thought it needed to be. I think that was the key part. Yeah.
And it's just that blindly assuming that I'm making more money, that will solve all the problems.
Yeah.
But if we're not purposeful with hey, let me price this in a way that allows it to be profitable. I mean, most people as a default don't, if you were to ask the general business owner out there, hey, are you priced to be profitable? How much profit are you going to make on this? There's a handful of people that can answer it, sure. But majority of people would be like, huh? I don't know. Maybe yes, I think I might be. And it's just like you were saying, that's my pet peeve too, is just the fact that people talk about revenue all the time. I mean, I know people who will they might have a 6 or a 7 figure or a blah, blah launch of some kind. Well, guess how much they spent on the back end, right? Like it can be a lot more than you might think. It takes money to build a growing business, like past that one-on-one solopreneur model, which can be a great model. I did that for 10 years in my business. But to go past that, when your business becomes bigger than just you in some fashion, that's where this becomes so important to consider.
That might sidetrack our conversation a little bit. So when I grew my business, and I did know that it was going to take a little bit of money to do the next growth phase of my business. And even now, as I'm evolving, the first thing I turn to is debt. And the first thing I turned to back then was debt, which is I disconnected entirely from what I was spending.
Yeah.
What do you think is the first way that businesses, when they're going to do growth, what's the first actionable step they should do besides, talk it out with somebody, hire a coach? How should they plan for it? Because I didn't plan for mine.
I think in some ways it's a loaded question because there's many things. But I really do think the first thing to do is, well, first of all, ask yourself why. Why do you want to grow? Because there's a big difference when you're a solopreneur and it's just you doing your thing and doing great. There's sort of this natural, it almost seems logical to be like, oh, hey, I'm doing great work. I've got lots of clients. I'm full. All right, if I want to keep growing, I'm just going to add more people to my team. If you're going to grow your business beyond being just you, for example, which is kind of that next stage of growth for a lot of solopreneurs, you are no longer just the doer. You're no longer the provider of whatever service it is you provide to your clients. You now have to become a leader as well. And for many people, it's kind of strange to say, right? But it's really, be aware of the fact of how much of a leader you want to become. You have to become a leader of team members. You have to be able to manage. A lot of the people I work with, and you were talking about the CEO level work earlier too, there's this shift from like being the doer to being the leader. Mm-hmm. And so almost the very first question is, do you want to make that shift? Like, do you really want to make that? Because a lot of people get themselves kind of, I don't want to say in trouble, but find themselves in a space where it's like, I've created a beast and I don't even know if I want that beast. And that's a really sucky place to get to. If it's like, especially if all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of team and a lot of responsibility and all this obligation to clients and et cetera, mm-hmm. and to be sitting there going, I don't even think I wanted this in the first place. It's really just the idea of going into it very purposely and being very real with ourselves. Like, it's easy to get caught up in the hype of grow. But I also know many people who are perfectly happy to be like, I'm just going to do my thing. I'm going to be the service provider. I'm going to work with clients directly, and it's all going to be good. I'm going to keep it simple. Because once you make that decision to grow bigger than just you, in that one-on-one capacity, there's so many other things to consider. There's team, there's systems, there's the profitability, there's all these pieces that suddenly kick in that are not for the faint of heart.
No, but I love to start with the why. Mm-hmm. But I also, the one thing you did teach me at the time, which is why I had such a hard time replacing myself early on, was that there's a payroll for the leader, the owner, and there is a payroll for the doer, the person that you don't want to be or that you're going to hire for. And I never included the payroll for the leader. And so I was never able to replace myself through that growth phase until I was able to add 2 different salaries on there. Could I make any big change? So that was
well, and that's the part, the money side of things. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to be in the situation that you described too, right? Where it's like, I'm paying everybody on my team, but I'm not paying myself. And, I get that there could be a season where that might need to be true, like a season of, investing more ahead of time to have a payoff down the road. That's fine if it's purposeful and clear that this is what it's going to look like. But I'm just such a firm believer, like, if you're in business for yourself, oh my gosh, you got to be getting paid. Mm-hmm. I don't, like, in my mind, you're getting paid all the time. Maybe you're not always getting paid exactly what you want, especially in some of those like crunch time, growth times. That may not always be true, but to make sure that we're getting paid, at the end of the day, this business wouldn't exist without us. So we deserve to be getting paid.
Yes. Again.
And yet it's really easy for that to not happen, like you were saying.
Oh, yeah. Again, another life lesson moment that Tina taught me. Yes, I'm sitting in front of a room of people I don't really know. Yeah, that was one of my roadblock moments that I'm bawling in front of these people. But yeah, and it's a difference. So there's that key thing that has to shift. I was transferring money out of my account to pay directly to my personal credit cards. That was payroll. But there's an energetic shift when you actually write yourself a check. And so I work with a lot of clients now because it was such a dramatic shift for myself, is that you physically need to write yourself a check or physically have your payroll. Like I'm an S corporation, so the payroll has to go through. That goes to my personal account, and then I use the same amount of money to pay the personal debt. That's my contribution to our household. But there was such a dramatic, energetic shift on that was one of the moments that the Profit First really kicked in for that.
Well, and the timing of it. That's the other thing I like with Profit First. It's like twice a month you're paying yourself, right? Like instead of like, oh, I'll just take some money when I can kind of thing, which may or may not ever happen. Like the consistency factor of it.
Yeah.
Like just, even if we're paying ourselves $5 or whatever, like even if for some reason it's a low amount, there's still something about like, I'm going to write myself that check regardless of the amount, and I'm going to do it twice a month, come hell or high water, so to speak. Like that's a real like CEO leadership type move. And that's such an empowering move.
It is
to do that for ourselves.
It is. And I think my first checks were like $500. I mean, they were tiny checks, and I was physically writing them to myself and had to deposit them into my personal account. And at the time when I was asked to do that, I was freaked out and scared that I didn't think I could actually do that. It's interesting how that stuck in my mindset. So investments and money failures kind of go hand in hand as we go to the next question. You had any, you may not consider it a money failure, but it's usually something, it usually happens when people hire bookkeepers or assistants. They've invested once, it didn't work out as well as they thought or they planned, and so they're hesitant to do another investment. Or they see that they invested heavily like in a program or tool that they never implemented, which would be a money failure on their part. Have you had one of those in your business, and maybe that's changed how you do investments now?
I would say that, my biggest money failure would be more around some of the decisions I've made about going into debt at various levels. Like when I hit six figures in 2009, one of the things I did at about that same time was I invested six figures in a coaching program that I was a part of. And, honestly, that's a little bit of a ridiculous move in some ways. Like, there were things about it that were very good in many ways too. But at the same time, when you're looking at it strictly from a money perspective, it took years to pay that debt off. Like it probably took 3 to 4 years to pay that debt off. And it was one of those things where it's just like the decision, I think, was a little bit of it was definitely one of those like caught up in the emotion of things decisions, which it can be so easy to make those decisions in many areas of business, but especially with money. And, I am all for taking a risk. I'm all for, there's times when maybe we got to do a little bit of an eek, like, yikes, I'm going to spend this money, or this is a bit more, or this is whatever. But at that point in time, I just did it like on blind faith. It was sort of like, oh, right, I'm going to spend this money, and here's all the things that are going to magically happen just because I spent the money, right? Like I had this thing in my head that it's like, if I'm brave enough to spend this amount of money, then it will all magically come back to me in some fashion. And it doesn't work that way. Like it's really, go figure. Hey, it doesn't work that way. But it was really this idea of knowing, okay, what's necessary here? Like, I don't have a problem with debt in my business. I really don't. Like, I'm not one of these people who will sit there and say, hey, never go into debt. Debt is bad. It's horrible. That kind of thing. Like, because I don't think that's true. But what I am against is going into debt without being purposeful on how we're going to get the return on that investment. And how legitimate and realistic is it? right? Like crossing my fingers, jumping in and hoping it all works out. That wasn't a smart way to do it. It really wasn't a smart way to do it. But to be like, hey, you know what, I'm going to invest X amount of dollars. Maybe I go into debt to do that. Maybe I use a line of credit or whatever it is. But here's what it's going to bring back to me. You know, it's going to allow me to do this. It's going to give me the ability to do that. It's going to teach me how to do that, or it's going to free me up to do this. Say you're hiring a team member or something. To be really purposeful with what's the return, and to be equally purposeful with, okay, how do I pay the money back? How do I pay the money back over time too? So it's just, you know, I would consider that, I don't even know that it's a money failure in some ways, but when I look back on it, that's a move that I don't always recommend to people. There's very few people where I would say, you're making six figures, go invest six figures at this moment. Like, that's almost a little ridiculous in some ways, right? But at the same time, you know, it's just a matter of really what I learned what I learned personally from that is, okay, what am I really doing this for? Like, what am I really looking for here? What am I really expecting here? And what's going to be the real repercussions of that? I mean, in my case, it was money I had. I didn't go into debt to do that, right? That was money I had available. But from a personal perspective, so when I say it took 3 to 4 years to pay it off, it took that long to pay it off from like the profit of, you know, in the books from the business end, like to pay it off from a shareholder's loan kind of perspective. It took a long time to pay that back and to get into a space where my books didn't look like I was losing money all the time on everything.
Yeah. So I also, working with you, shifted when we were coming up with, does the business contribute to my life? And on W-2, it wasn't. Oh, I think my one W-2 was $6,000 for the year. But when I was able to add in the personal development I was doing and the travel experience I was doing and the things that if I didn't have the business, what was being contributed to my life, then that gave me a whole different viewpoint of what was actually happening. So I had thought of a lot of my personal development was part of my employee pay or my compensation package, because I definitely wouldn't have that if I was working for an employer. I wouldn't be able to have the opportunity to do some of the things I've been doing in the last 5 years. But some of it's business when I learn a new tool. I wonder, some folks are wondering, well, I want to invest, but I don't actually know what the benefits in return are. Do you have any ideas or clues that they could use to try to figure that question out?
There's 3 ways that we get a return on investment.
Okay.
So money is one of them. That's the obvious one, and that's the one that people talk about the most, right? Is that I'm going to spend X amount of dollars and I should make X amount of dollars back, or I want to make, or I want to make 10 times that amount of money back. But there's actually money, time, and energy are the 3 ways that we can get a return on an investment. And so for me, for example, I am more than happy to invest in my team. I don't have to go into debt to do that, but I'm more than happy to invest in my team. They aren't the ones going out there and making money. That's my job. But you better believe the return is so worth it, because I don't have to spend time and energy doing the things that they do for me, that they do for the business. And for me, that's so freaking worth it. It's just like, I will happily spend money on my team. And I have happily spent lots of money on my team. I'll continue to spend lots of money on my team because for me, that return is worth it. It's really a matter of knowing. I think it's working with somebody like you, Connie, that can really dig into the specifics around the money piece, like being really, really purposeful there is so important. But alongside that too, it's also just like, what's the business I want to have? What's the business I want to have? I refuse to work 24/7. I just do. I'm not the type of person who's going to work 24/7. I don't work weekends. I work probably on average about 30 hours a week, give or take, right? I refuse to work more than I need to. And so from that perspective, I'm happy to spend the money so that I don't have to do that. There's other people I know who are in an opposite space where they're like, they have no problem working lots of hours. They like working lots of hours. Their lifestyle allows them to work lots of hours. So they don't have to or don't want to spend money on getting help. and support and such. But to consider for ourselves, like even every time we're buying like a training program, I can go buy a training on doing Facebook ads, for example. It's asking myself, well, what am I looking to get from this? Like, what's the return this is going to give me? Is it going to give me, a quicker way to get something done? Is it going to give me the ability to make more money in some fashion? What does that look like? And to just flat out start asking ourselves that question every time we go to spend money, I think is so important versus doing it because, everybody else is doing it. Everybody's telling you to do it. We look around online and see everybody else. It looks like they're all doing it. And, we got to fit in or we got to follow, what everybody else is doing and blah, blah, blah. Those kind of money decisions, those emotional money decisions are the ones that tend to come back to haunt us. Or at the very least, they come back and we go like, oh, I don't know. Was it worth it or not? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I'm not really sure. I don't have any way to tell because I didn't know ahead of time whether or not what I actually wanted to see happen here.
Right.
As a result of this. And then it really becomes up to us to make sure that return is there. Because like I said too, when I invested in that coaching program, and believe me, there was many things about that coaching program that were awesome in many, many ways. I got huge value from it. Was it worth 6 figures at that time? Not necessarily. Was it worth 6 figures over time? Sure. For me, it definitely was. But when I went into it, it was so blind. It was just like, all right, let me spend the money and everything will magically come together, that there wasn't any way to actually measure the success of whether it was worth it or not.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I love that you just need a pause. The same with the cash handling system that Profit First teaches, or any intentional cash handling system, is pausing. Money comes in, pause, celebrate, then spend. And when you're making an investment, you see the investment, you pause, consider, and then make a choice. And I think that's the key word here, at least in my takeaway from that.
Yeah, pause, consider. And it's not even like that has to be something overly complicated either, right? But, if I think of it this way, I don't know if you may do this with clients too, Connie, but if I think of it this way, it's like, how would you, if you had to explain to your money person, say your accountant or whoever, if you had to explain to them why you spent that money and what return you were looking for, like, could you actually answer that question? And again, it's not like we have to justify everything we do, but as an exercise to play with. It's like, oh, I spent $500 on this training, or I spent $5,000 on this program, or I spent whatever on this program. And if somebody was like, great, what was the return you were looking for here? Would we be able to answer it? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Saying more money isn't an answer. Like, everybody wants more money. It's not an answer.
No.
Okay, great. How much more?
No.
What specifically were you going to do with this in order to allow yourself to make more money? Kind of thing.
So true. Cool. Well, as a coach that's been around for a while, I'm going to jump ahead. Do you have a board of director or business advisors that you bounce ideas off of, or maybe accountability partners for yourself?
Not officially. No. I mean, I've worked with coaches and I'm part of, a mastermind group or something from time to time, but not anything in a formal way. I think for me too, like, especially on the money side of things, I'm already pretty solid on that side. So, I guess at the very least I could talk to my accountant if I want to, but even then I don't. Not about stuff like this.
Right.
Anyhow. But yeah, I'm pretty self-accountable, I think, in many ways with that. Or if and where I want support or need support, I'll look for it at the time. But I don't officially have like a board of directors or anything like that I work with in that way.
And then when you need a creative boost, what do you do?
A creative boost?
Yeah, like if you're, I know that you're working with somebody to come up with a new program that you've released by the time this recording's happening. So when you did that with Andrea Lee, did you guys did just being with her just helped with that creative boost that you wanted to partner together and do something new, or what do you do? Or do you think about that each year, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I think for me, the creative boost, like, I get a lot of creative energy just from being in response to what's going on around me.
Okay.
So I might have a conversation with somebody, and it doesn't even have to be some official like coaching conversation necessarily. Like I might be talking with my team. I might be talking with a friend, like somebody like Andrea.
Mm-hmm.
I might be doing a few different things like that. Or I might even just like hop on Facebook and see what people are talking about, or read some newsletters, or go on LinkedIn or something like that. I find that's where I get most of my creativity from, is
Okay.
kind of like seeing what's going on around me and then responding to that in some way. And for me too, like as strange as it may seem, a lot of my creativity comes from getting annoyed with something.
I love
Like,
that.
honestly, like most of my business is born from the fact that I got annoyed about something. So it's like if somebody's doing whatever and it's like, no, I mean, a lot of the work I'm doing right now is very specifically around team and team leadership, which I've done that work with clients for a number of years now, like part of our CEO work and things like that you mentioned. It's been a part of it. But moving forward, it's going to be a much bigger focus for me, just because I look around and see so many of the problems that are going on for people on both sides of the coin, those who are hiring and those who are being hired. It's annoying to me. Like, it's just like, no, it doesn't have to be that way, kind of thing. Like, I'll get annoyed and frustrated, and that becomes a pretty big, for whatever reason, motivator for me. Good, bad, or otherwise. That's more or less the way I'm wired.
That's cool, because when the last program we did together was, I had never thought of all the areas in the business that I really show up as the leader, and the area, especially in client leadership. I think that's a good shift for people to consider when in a service-based business, that we are the leaders when it comes to that, rather than the client leading. And it can be a big shift for people in their work. So awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Because we're coming up on time, let's end on an inspirational note. You created your business to pay for your kids, to, have that family income. But is there something else that the business has evolved into, or you've created the business to do, that gives back to your life, or that you're able to give back to the community? What's the business do for you now?
I think, I don't know. When I started my business, it was more or less just to make money to live. Like, I didn't have kids. I wasn't married or anything when I first started my business. And so there was a little bit of an element of like, woohoo, let's just make it up as we go. And even for many years when I was married, I mean, I was making money. I was making a pretty good income from my business, but it wasn't the be all end all. Like, it wasn't, I mean, we were probably about 50-50 for the most part with my spouse for most of the business. But it wasn't like, any big aspirations or whatever that might be. But ultimately, I mean, there came a time, well, it was about 4 years ago now, where my ex-husband, husband at the time, where we split up from each other. And truthfully, I don't know if I would have been able to do that if it wasn't for my business. Because at that point in time, like, my business had continued to grow, and, in some ways it was purposeful, in other ways I was just making it up as I went. But at that point in time, when things were starting to change with my family, it was kind of like, okay, if we're no longer married here, am I able to support myself? Like, this business would be it. This business is the only, this would become the only income for our family, basically. And truthfully, that's exactly what's happened. I mean, it's been the case now for 4 years. If the business hadn't, like, if I hadn't done the work I'd done over the years and kind of built up to that point, so in a funny way, it's really about just being able to know that I can take care of things in our lives, for me and my girls. Like, it's not even any big lofty goal. I'm not necessarily looking to change the world or whatever per se. Like, there's work I do purposely with clients, and I'm very purposeful about how I support people and where I support them and the impact of that. But the other side of that coin is it's just, this business has allowed me to create the life that I want to be able to have for my kids and I. And if that didn't exist, who knows what decisions I may or may not have made along the way in a different fashion, right? Like, it's very, it's just very interesting to see the evolution of that. So I didn't set out purposely to do that in the beginning by any means. But looking back on it, it's been one of the most empowering aspects of my life to create this business in the way that I have.
And the kids are watching. So have they picked up their own entrepreneurial? Can you see? Are they getting to be that little entrepreneurial mindset?
I don't know. They're only 9 and 11, so it's not anything I've seen overtly yet in that way. But they're both very stubborn, so hopefully that helps in the long run. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. So it's not anything, and nor am I one of these like, hey, ladies, let's go set up a lemonade stand. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I'm not overly like purpose or pushy, if you will, about it in that way. But we'll see. I mean, that was one of the best pieces of advice I got from a coach years ago too, in regards to the kids, is like, they learn best by seeing what we do in our own lives, you know, and how the choices we make and the things that we create for ourselves and so on. And so, yeah, if there's anything I can give them out of this, it really is like, decide what you want and make it happen. Like all things are possible that way in that regard. So we will see. Stay tuned. Yeah. I'll let you know.
Well, I love that all things are possible and they can do it. I think that's a great, it's a great lesson. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say how old I was, but let's say 5 years ago. So I was probably around 45, 46 was the first time I learned I actually have the choice to be whoever I want to be in any given moment. And that kind of makes me a little sad, but it wasn't something outlined in my family. It wasn't something, talked about in school. So I applaud parents that are showing their kids a different way of showing up and being. And so I can't wait to see what they do and create in the world. So awesome. Well, Tina, thank you. I have so many great takeaways. The pausing between, how cash comes in, everything from cash coming into your business, creating an intentional cash system like Profit First, to making the investment. That emotional blind faith, just being brave, is something we need to stop and create a different investment plan. And I love what type of return, taking the time to figure out the return of investment, money, time, or energy. And most businesses that I work with get stuck on the money part of it, but consider both parts of it. Leader, it of course takes money to build a growing business, but where are you growing? Why are you growing? And do you want to make the shift before you grow? If only those had come up first for me, but also that you are agreeing to step up to be a leader during that growth. And are you willing to do that? Good takeaways from that. I think I still would have grown. I think at the time I just knew that, again, it was like I was annoyed. I knew there was a different way that bookkeeping could be done with businesses. And I felt that was the first step. Nobody had just taken that route. But I had not considered that I was actually stepping into a leader. I think for years I tried to avoid and push that back, that I wasn't a leader. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, and you're not alone in that. You know what I mean? Like that's that blind sort of like, I'm going to keep growing. Oh no, I'm a leader. Now what?